Django app defaults. I'm looking for a way to have application defaults and settings that are easy to use, difficult to get wrong, and have little overhead. Currently I have it organized as follows. In my project I have With this setup I could import and use settings in the regular Django way, from Django.conference import settings, and settings.30. Update 3, why we need this. Default settings, defaults. An application is more convenient to use if it can be configured by overriding a set of sensible default settings. The application has domain knowledge, so it makes sense for it to provide sensible defaults whenever possible. It isn't convenient for a user of the application to need to provide all the settings needed by every app. It should be sufficient to override a small subset, and leave the rest with default values. It is very useful if defaults can react to the environment. You'll often want to do something different when debug is true, but any other global setting could be useful. For example, myapp_identicon_dir equals os.path.join settings.media_root, identicons, this URL. Project, site/global, settings must override app defaults, i.e. a user who defined myapp_identicon_dir equals s3 column//meappbucket.example.com/identicons in the global settings.py file for their site should get this value, and not the application's default. Any solution that keeps close to the normal way of using settings, import ... settings. Settings.foo is superior to a solution that needs new syntax, since new syntax will diverge and we would get new and unique ways to use settings from app to app. The Zen of Python probably applies here. If the implementation is hard to explain, it's a bad idea. If the implementation is easy to explain, it may be a good idea. The original post posited the two key problems below, leaving the above assumptions unstated. Problem number 1. When running unit tests for the app there is no site however, so settings wouldn't have any of the myapp.defaults. Problem number 2. There is also a big problem if myapp.defaults needs to use anything from settings, for example, settings.debug, since you can't import settings from defaults.py. Since that would be a circular import. To solve problem number 1 I created a layer of indirection. And usage. This allows the conference.py file to work with an empty settings file too, and the myapp code can continue using the familiar settings.30. It doesn't solve problem number 2, defining application settings based on, for example, settings.debug. My current solution is to add to the conference class. But this is not satisfying since my site can no longer override the setting, and my app's defaults/settings are now spread over 2 files. Is there an easier way to do this? Update 4, just use the Django test runner. The app you're testing relies on the Django framework, and you cannot get around the fact that you need to bootstrap the framework first before you can test the app. Part of the bootstrapping process is creating a default settings.py and further using the Django supplied test runners to ensure that your apps are being tested in the environment that they are likely to be run. While that sounds like it ought to be true, it doesn't actually make much sense. For example, there is no such thing as a default settings.py, at least not for a reusable app. When talking about integration testing, it makes sense to test an app with the site/settings/apps/databases/caches/resource limits/etc. that it will encounter in production. For unit testing, however, we want to test just the unit of code that we're looking at, with as few external dependencies and settings as possible. The Django test runners do, and should, mock out major parts of the framework, so it can't be said to be running in any real environment. While the Django test runners are great, there are a long list of issues it doesn't handle. The two biggies for us are, running tests sequentially is so slow that the test suite becomes unused, 5 minutes when running in parallel, almost an hour when running sequentially. 2. Sometimes you just need to run tests on big databases. We restore last night's backup to a test database that the tests can run against, much too big for fixtures. The people who made Nose, Py.test, Twill, Selenium, and any of the first testing tools really do know testing well, since that is their only focus. It would be a shame to not be able to draw on their collective experience. I am not the first to have encountered this problem, and there doesn't look like there is an easy or common solution. Here are two projects that have different solution. Update Python OIP provider method. The Python OIP provider package, this URL, has another creative way to solve the app settings/defaults problem. It uses properties to define defaults in a myapp/settings.py file. Using a setting inside myapp becomes good, solves problem number 2, using settings when defining defaults, solves problem number 1, using default settings from tests. Bad, different syntax for accessing settings, settings.getFoo, versus the normal, settings.foo. Myapp cannot provide defaults for settings that will be used outside of myapp. The settings you get from Django.conference import settings, will not contain any defaults from myapp. External code can do, from myapp import settings, to get regular settings and myapp defaults, but this breaks down if more than one app wants to do this. Update 2, the Django conf package. Note, not related to Django's app. Config. With Django app config, app settings are created in myapp/conference.py, which needs to be loaded early, so you should probably import the conference.py file from models.py, since it is loaded early. Usage. AppConf will auto-magically add the myapp_ prefix, and also auto-magically detect if myapp_home_root has been redefined/overridden in the project's settings. Pro, simple to use, solves problem number 1, accessing app settings from tests, and problem number 2, using settings when defining defaults. As long as the conference.py file is loaded early, external code should be able to use defaults defined in myapp. Con, significantly magical. The name of the setting in conference.py is different from its usage, since appconf automatically adds the myapp_ prefix. External/opaque dependency.
I've just created Django app defaults based on all of the requirements. It's basically a generalization of the second approach highlighted in the question, class conference object column. Usage. Then anywhere within your project. To load default setting for a single app instead of all of the apps, just do.
I have written a Django package for the management of app settings called Django Pluggable App Settings. It's a package that allows you to define sensible defaults for your settings but also adds advanced features like type checking or callable settings. It makes use of meta classes to allow for an easy definition of the app settings. Of course, this adds an external dependency to your project. Edit 1. Example usage could be as follows. Install the package using pip. Create your app settings class in any of your project's files. For example, in app_settings.py. app_settings.py. Import your My App settings in any file and access its attributes. Note that the settings are only initialized on first access, so if you never access a setting, its presence in django.conference.settings is never checked.
Problem number 1. When running unit tests for the app there is no site however, so settings wouldn't have any of the myapp.de faults. This problem is solved by using the testing framework that comes with Django. See the documentation, as it bootstraps the test environment correctly for you. Keep in mind that Django tests always run with debug equals false. Problem number 2. There is also a big problem if myapp.de faults needs to use anything from settings, for example settings.debug, since you can't import settings from defaults.py, since that would be a circular import. This is not really a problem. Once you import from myapp.defaults in myapp.settings, everything in settings will be in scope. So you don't to import debug, it is already available to you as it's in the global scope.
When I am structuring apps, I try to define functionality in the form of mixins. Each setting should be picked up by one functionality mixin, if possible. So in your example from above. Usage? This is really easy for another developer to see exactly what is going on, alleviates the need for third-party or first-party magic, and allows us to think about things in terms of functionalities, rather than in terms of individual settings. I just think that the settings layer of Django should be kept as simple as possible, and any complexity should be the responsibility of the view layer. I have run into a lot of confusing settings configurations that were created by other developers, and those configurations consumed a lot of my time when there was nobody there to explain what was going on under the hood.
If you want to see more, please consider subscribing.